Hi, my name is Sia Meller.
My name is Grace Gorgon.
My name is Sophia Perino.
My name is Briella.
My name is Logan Manigapati.
My name is Jacob Reed.
My name is Nayan Logaraju.
My name is Pranav Nambiar.
And I'm Victor Wong.
And we're going to be talking about the Renaissance.
During this time, there was no unifying government or coalition in Europe for the European people.
The Roman Catholic Church exerted a conservative and rigid influence on European society and supported the feudal system of noble lords who owned the land and the serfs who were bounded to that land. There were many important developments in Europe that caused the church and feudal system to lose some of its power.
Crusades allowed for an exchange of ideas between European and Islamic scholars, and along with the ideas of individualism and non-religious scholarship that came from Greek and Roman classic literature, the Renaissance was fueled. New ideas inspired new forms of leadership and art that displayed people in an ideal form. There was a heavy focus on the individual and also a more secular view of the world.
These next three are the leading humanists and their contributions to society. Petrarch, who is the father of humanism and also had the basics for the Italian language. Machiavelli, who is known for being the author of Prince, separated politics from morality and believed that a ruler should behave on Christian moral principles and be understanding of human nature. And the Medicis were a rich banker family in Italy, and they financed art and were very wealthy.
And Brunelleschi, he was the pioneer of engineering during this time. He was most known for the Brunelleschi dome. And then there's Leonardo da Vinci. He was a painter, writer, and inventor, and was most known for the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. He was also known for the original Renaissance man. And there's Michelangelo. He was a renowned Italian sculptor, painter, architect, and poet that was best known for his marble sculpture of David and his painting of the Sistine Chapel. And there's Raphael, who was also an Italian painter, and his best known works were the School of Athens, and he used a lot of religious imagery. Oh, and Nayan and Pranav are here to discuss the differences between the art in the Northern Renaissance and the Italian Renaissance.
So in both the Northern Renaissance and the Italian Renaissance, art focused on the naturalistic aspect as artists showcased human beings interacting with nature. However, unlike the Italian Renaissance, the Northern Renaissance was more focused on religion rather than secular ideas. Furthermore, the Northern Renaissance depicted scenes from everyday life, unlike the art of the Italian Renaissance. For example, Peter Bruegel the Elder, a Northern Italian Renaissance artist, painted scenes from the Bible using techniques such as soft textures and finer details.
So now let's talk about Christian humanists. Christian humanists sought reform in society and religion. Desiderius Erasmus advocated for people to learn how to read the Bible by themselves, in Greek, Latin, and other languages. He also called out the lack of knowledge in the clergy. On the other hand, Thomas More, an advisor to King Henry VIII, wrote literature that dreamt of a utopia. This led to him advocating for a more just society, which included education for women and the abolition of private property. All Christian humanists, however, sought to reform Christianity and expand everyone's knowledge of the Bible.
Talking about the printing press, before the printing press, the access to written works were only for the wealthy and those high up in the church, due to them needing to be written out word for word by hand.
Johannes Gutenberg created a hand-operated wooden press that differed from earlier technological advancements. Gutenberg's Bible was the first book produced from the movable type in 1456.
The printing press made vernacular literature the everyday language of a region, increasingly available to people who didn't have any or a lot of religious training. It also accelerated the development of unique national cultures through Europe.
The Gutenberg press would also increase the literacy rates in Europe.
New monarchies were created during this time, such as Spain, which was created and unified when Castile and Aragon merged. They centralized power through the Alcabala tax, which taxed property and the sale and exchange of property, and they consolidated military power. They also made the Inquisition, which forced Christian conversions on Jews and rooted out any heresy. And the Reconquista was when Muslims and Jews were pushed out of Spain, and they were also converted.
So another new monarchy was France, led by Louis XI. He weakened the power of the aristocracy, and he added valuable land to the nation. The royal income created a royal army, and then Louis XI
that 9 or like 11?
I don't know.
It's 11.
What is,
Oh,
it's
okay.
11, right? Okay. He created royal income to create a royal army.
It's 14.
It's 11. Exile.
It's 14. Right?
Oh.
What?
It says it's 14.
I don't know if there is a
Wait,
wedding.
X is 10. I is
I thought that was 11.
1. This is 11. Wait, what?
I honestly think you should leave this part.
Okay, is that it?
Well, in Latin.
No,
X
wait,
is
I'm not
10.
done.
Yeah, it's 10 and
Okay,
1.
restart reading the France thing, but say Louis the 14th.
Okay.
Because that's who makes
Why are there two different Louis?
That's what their names were.
That's what their names
No, I mean
were.
like why they're two different but they're the same.
So another new monarchy was France, led by Louis XIV. He weakened the power of the aristocracy and added valuable land to the nation. He created a royal income, which then in turn created a royal army. His enemies accused him of spinning webs and plots and conspiracies, but he also made France a more significant world power.
Another new monarchy was England. King Henry VIII broke away from the Pope and created the Church of England, and he gained all power over England. So England had the War of Roses, which was a series of civil wars between different English dynasties, and the Tudors eventually won. And the English monarchy also created the Star Chamber, which was an English law court created to hear cases against wealthy and powerful individuals.
So the Holy Roman Empire was formed in the 9th century, but by the 16th century it was split into two by the religions. The north was formed by Protestants and the southern were Catholics. The Diet of Augsburg was a meeting in which the southern Catholics tried to force Catholicism onto the Protestants. And Protestant cities formed a defensive alliance called the Schmalkaldic League.
Another major development during this time was the Age of Exploration. There were a lot of motives for exploration, including God, gold, and glory. Gold was the biggest one. A lot of countries were seeking monetary gain. There was a religious reason behind like Protestants seeking refuge from religious persecution in Europe, and there was more commercial motives in general. A lot of countries were trying to find a new route to the east. So instead of taking the Silk Road, they could go through a water route. Another development during this time was mercantilism, and mercantilism measured wealth by the amount of gold and silver. All of the wealth from colonies went back to the mother country, and this was particularly developed in France and England. So a country would grow if it had a favorable balance of trade, meaning they had more exports than imports. So this created the increased demands for the colonies, and also led to things like joint stock companies being created, but we'll go more in depth on that later.
Several advances in knowledge were made. Cartography, better and more detailed maps were created because there's higher knowledge of the world. Latin sails were triangular sails that were used in the caravels, and they were developed by Arab sailors, and they allowed for more flexibility. The stern post rudder was a steering device from China that made ships more maneuverable. The astrolabe was a star-based device which helped sailors determine where they were at sea based on the position of the stars, and the compass helped determine direction by always pointing towards the north.
This led to major world superpowers like Spain and Portugal being developed, and the treaties like the Treaty of Tordesillas, and major expansions in waterward trade passages.
And as we move on, there's rivals on the world stage. Christopher Columbus was sponsored by the Spanish monarchs in front of the West Indies, and he called everyone there the Indians. And he thought he reached Asia, but he did not. Amerigo Vespucci. He named the Americas because he was the first to acknowledge that it was a new world, and so they named America after him. And then Hernan Cortez, he conquered the Aztecs in South America, and by doing this, he used disease, which is smallpox, and he killed so many that he was able to conquer them.
Yeah, and Vasco Núñez del Balboa, he crossed the Isthmus of Panama, and he was the first European to reach the eastern shore of the Pacific Ocean. Ferdinand Magellan was searching for an eastern route to the Spice Islands, which were in the Philippines. He went around the tip of South America, and his crew reached the Spice Islands, and eventually went around Africa and back to Spain, which was the first crew to circumnavigate the world. John Cabot reached the eastern coast of Canada and allowed England to claim land in North America.
The Treaty of Tordesillas was created. was created by the Pope to settle a disagreement between Spain and Portugal because they both wanted land in South America.
The encomienda system was used by Spain, in which indigenous people were forced to work on plantations in exchange for food and shelter.
And throughout this time, there was major rivalry between all the European colonies. They wanted to find the best alternate routes to Asia, and they competed for wealth and resources and wanted to monopolize and colonize.
Next is the colonial expansion and Columbian exchange. The Columbian exchange was the exchange of plants, animals, and diseases in the New World. This exchange expanded the West Atlantic European powers and their economic opportunities. Some of the social and cultural effects of this were the exchange of diseases, which included smallpox, measles, and mumps. These diseases wiped out millions of the native populations, which meant there was not enough laborers for European plantations. Indigenous groups forced into labor for European plantations meant that they had to leave behind old practices and traditions. This led to the transatlantic slave trade, bringing in large amounts of African slaves in for the Europeans.
Prince Henry the Navigator wanted to spread Christianity and get direct access to gold, ivory, and slave from Africa. He supported and sponsored expeditions, and he never went on them. The Gold Coast was founded by Portuguese sailors looking for gold, and they found gold on the western African coast, and they named it the Gold Coast. They created trading networks there and ports along. Vasco da Gama sailed around Africa and got spices from Colcart.
Next is the slave trade. Before enslaved Africans were used to work on plantations. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Europeans used indigenous peoples as slave laborers and forced them to work in cruel conditions. But as the demand for slave trade, specifically with Africans, grew larger and it grew more complex.
So they created a triangle trade where Europeans would go to Africa, buy Africans, and then they would go through the Middle Passage to the Americas and then sell all the Africans as slaves. And then they would get all the profits they made from selling Africans and bring it back to Europe to import to other places. The Middle Passage was shipment of multiple enslaved Africans to the Americas and West Indies during the 15th, 18th to mid-1800s. Disease, starvation, mistreatment by crew members, severe weather, and suicide were all factors for the Middle Passage, and they threw dead bodies overboard.
The Planters Society, they established plantations that used large workforces to farm crops such as rice, sugarcane, coffee, and cotton, but only the members of the society profited from this labor.
During this time was also the commercial revolution. The rise of capitalism and moving away from trade economics and feudalism was a major theme throughout this time period. Capitalism introduced private ownership. Before, land and resources were typically open for everyone, but with private ownership, peasants lost access to lots of resources that they previously held, like land. This resulted in a further division of classes.
Economic changes that came to Europe after the 1500s had widespread consequences for the economy and society. While new patterns emerged, traditional hierarchies and status relations continue to define the roles of individuals and many groups. Subsistence farming and commercial agriculture is the next topic. Starting with feudalism, that is when a lord grants land to a vassal in exchange for loyalty and military service. Then we have the manor, which is a large agricultural estate under the control of a noble or ruler. Subsistence farming is when peasants only grew enough food to feed themselves and their families. But not long after, the Great Plague, which began in 1347, reduced the European population by 1/3, killing 20 million Europeans. This plague caused severe labor shortages, thus ending serfdom in Western Europe, but it continued through Eastern Europe. Crop rotation and the open field system. Crop rotation was when the open field system was when the farmland was divided into 2 or 3 large fields, and within each field it was further divided into narrow strips. This technique ensured that areas of good and poor soil were evenly distributed. Soil exhaustion was a major problem on the farms, so the system of crop rotation was created. This technique included planting crops in different fields at different times and helped counter this issue.
Serfdom, peasants, and revolts. Peasants, who made up the majority of the population that farmed on the land, occupied the lowest level of social order. Serfdom. They were legally bound to the land and subject to the authority of the landlord. And peasants. Peasants revolted in France and England, and landlords tried to reimpose conditions that existed before the Great Plague. A much larger revolt happened at the Holy Empire. Serfs, influenced by Martin Luther, revolted to gain greater economic and social freedom.
Also during this time was the rise of joint stock companies. One example of a joint stock company was the Dutch East Indian Company, which today would be worth $8 trillion US. Joint stock companies raised large amounts of capital for international trade and colonization ventures. The risk was evenly distributed among the stockholders, and investors received dividends or payments as return on their investments. The growth of towns and commerce made merchants and bankers very powerful, introducing a new economic elite. This can be observed in especially London and Amsterdam.
So let's talk about the causations of the Renaissance. The Renaissance originated in Italy, and it caused a chain reaction that helped cause multiple changes in European society. Religion and art. So since the Roman Catholic Church held power, the invitation of new pre-classical era teachings caused society and people to question the church and their laws. From this movement came the creation of humanists, who embodied the study of worldly topics such as history, philosophy, natural sciences, and mathematics. Renaissance painters and sculptors soon began to follow these humanistic ideas and centered their art not around religion, but focused more on the naturalistic aspect of human nature.
Now let's talk about the rise of capitalism in Europe. The establishment of colonies in North America caused European countries to focus trade in the Atlantic rather than the Mediterranean. This resulted in certain countries such as England rising in trading power, but countries such as Italy losing power. This also led to organized systems of taxation, increasingly professional armies, and legal systems being established. Other countries also became banking powers such as London and Amsterdam, or cities, and the influx of income from the colonies resulted in agricultural changes in Europe.
Now let's talk about secularism. As nations increased in trade, those with power were typically educated and more skilled. And this didn't necessarily mean nobles.
This is the end of our first podcast for
Unit 1.
Unit 1.
You started
Yeah,
that.
Unit 1.